Original Gothic from the German studio Piranha Bytes released in 2001, a year before The Elder Scrolls III, Morrowind, and in many ways became one of the first open-world action RPGs that later set the direction for the genre's development. Despite its uncompromising difficulty, abundance of bugs, and technical issues, the project quickly gained cult status, spawning several sequels and a whole host of spiritual successors. And if we're talking about games that truly needed a remake, the first Gothic would almost certainly rank among the most in demand. Trying to run this ancient relic on modern hardware without fan patches and modifications can easily end in failure. That's why Gothic 1 Remake was, for many fans, not just another reinterpretation of a classic, but one of the most anticipated projects of recent years. The entire atmosphere and plot of the original Gothic were subordinated to a single goal: to create the most gloomy and oppressive dark fantasy world possible. The action takes place in a colony for the mining of magical ore where convicted criminals are sent. To ensure no one can escape, a group of mages creates an impenetrable magical barrier around the valley. However, everything does not go according to plan. The dome goes out of control and turns into a trap from which it is impossible to escape. You can enter, but you can no longer leave. The convicts quickly realize that power is now in their hands, and the colony splits into several rival camps. The old camp continues to cooperate with the king, supplying him with ore in exchange for food, weapons, and other material goods. The new camp, on the contrary, under the leadership of the water mages, tries to accumulate enough ore to one day destroy the barrier and gain freedom. And those who settled in the swamps create a cult of the Sleeper, a mysterious deity that they believe will one day awaken and lead them out of captivity. It is into this tangle of intrigues, political interests, and frankly dubious personalities that the protagonist is thrown. The story of the original Gothic worked especially well in the first half of the game. We had to navigate between the interests of the different camps, gradually choosing whom to join. Moreover, no one actively tried to lure us to their side. We ourselves sized up who among this motley company of bandits, fanatics, and adventurers aroused the least repulsion. This created quite a few interesting situations. Unfortunately, in the second half the narrative became significantly more linear and the number of important choices noticeably decreased. There was also a fair amount of backtracking. In this aspect, Gothic 1 Remake barely changes the original. The main story remains the same, although some story quests have undergone minor reworking for smoother storytelling. However, only those who remember the source material well will notice such changes. The developers expanded the side content much more significantly. Many old quests were reworked or expanded, new characters with their own stories appeared, and some familiar heroes received much more developed plot lines. The most pleasant thing is that all these changes feel incredibly organic. They fit so naturally into the game world that you can only notice the additions either by knowing the original well or by trying to use old guides. The developers decided not to change the foundation of the gameplay formula but noticeably refined it. First of all, they tried to preserve the original's main strength, an extremely unfriendly world that couldn't care less whether you survive or not. Once behind the barrier, we remain easy prey for the local fauna for a long time. In the early stages, even the most harmless-looking digger rats can kill the hero in a couple of hits, and a pack of wolves can terrorize the player almost until the middle of the playthrough. The world of Gothic 1 Remake does not adjust to us and makes no allowances for inexperience. The game follows all the postulates of the old, if not ancient, school of game design. There is neither a compass nor markers nor a glowing path to the objective. There is no map at first either. You have to buy it and first figure out who even sells it. And the map itself will not become a magical solution to all problems. At best it will show your current location, and everything else you will have to find yourself. When receiving a quest, you need to listen carefully to your interlocutors, orient yourself in the terrain, and determine the cardinal directions. Often the directions look something like this: go northeast from the lake. Between the rocks you'll find a forest, and in it, a cave. And this, by the way, is still a fairly detailed description. To make the player's life a little easier without destroying the original vision, the developers added a glossary. The protagonist records everything he considers important there: met characters, information about monsters, descriptions of locations, and his own observations. Moreover, this is not just a quest journal. Sometimes it is here that you can find important details about the world, better understand the characters' motives, or get a hint about where to go next. World exploration has also been noticeably expanded. Many secret places with valuable rewards have appeared, as well as new puzzles related to studying the environment. Now the hero can swim underwater and interact with objects while submerged. But what stands out much more is the appearance of climbing. On sheer cliffs, you can notice characteristic textures that the hero can climb, opening new areas and caches. Of course, Gothic wouldn't be itself if it didn't add a pinch of its signature cruelty to this mechanic. To learn to climb, you need to find a mentor, and there is only one in the entire game, sitting on the coast not far from the swamp camp, which the player may not visit for dozens of hours or miss entirely. That's the kind of peculiar reward for curiosity. Personally, though, I would have placed this teacher in a more accessible location, if only because without climbing it is impossible to complete some quests, not to mention fully exploring the world. The combat system has also undergone a serious overhaul. Melee combat at first still feels rather clumsy. The hero holds even one-handed weapons with both hands and swings them as if picking them up for the first time. But at least all strikes now work with a single button rather than a combination of presses as before. And there is one very elegant solution here. As you learn to handle weapons, the hero himself changes. The grip becomes more confident, the movements smoother, and individual attacks begin to form into beautiful combos. Through the game's mechanics, we are literally shown the character's development. From a clumsy convict, he gradually turns into an experienced warrior. And for this, you really need to put in effort, earn experience, find mentors, save up money for training, and only then receive the deserved reward in the form of new capabilities. Archery and magic use have become noticeably more pleasant. For the former, they added full bowstring drawing and free aiming, while spells gained a charging scale that allows more precise control over their use. The mage path, as before, remains the most difficult, but at the same time the most rewarding. Joining the ranks of the mages is not easy. You can only do this closer to the middle of the game, and until then you have to make do with scrolls and the basic firebolt rune. However, it deserves credit. In the early stages it can solve most problems. The arsenal of magical abilities impresses with its variety. There are simple spells like Wind Fist, which deals minor damage but can knock the enemy back, as well as destructive fire tornadoes that allow you to deal with even the strongest enemies in a single use. In addition, a mage can transform into various creatures, summon demons, and even raise an entire army of skeletons. True, for such power you have to pay with fragility. Until the very end of the game, the mage remains extremely vulnerable and dies from literally a couple of hits. The warrior path feels completely different. Weapon trainers can be found in almost any camp, and the variety of blades, axes, and armor is pleasantly surprising. All faction armor consists of 3 elements: the armor itself, a belt, and boots. Each has its own stats, and together they give the total bonus. As a rule, for each element there will be 6 types of upgrades that not only change the armor's parameters but also its appearance. The last major innovation was the reworked lockpicking. Now it is a full-fledged puzzle based on a system of interconnected pins and plates that must be brought into the correct position. The task seems simple only at first glance and sometimes forces you to seriously rack your brains. It is in such moments that you especially well understand the philosophy of Gothic 1 Remake. The game does not try to lead the player by the hand. It respects their curiosity, patience, and ingenuity, and for the shown resourcefulness it is almost always ready to reward generously. Of course, the main difference of Gothic 1 Remake is the visuals. The game runs on Unreal Engine 5 and delivers a quite decent picture for a B-tier project. The developers managed to preserve the recognizable style and flavor of the original while significantly increasing the detail and density of the world. The remake looks modern and beautiful in its own way, and most importantly, atmospheric. The only noticeable drawback, not counting bugs and the technical state, is that against the abundance of vegetation, small details, and rich surroundings, pickable items sometimes read rather poorly. For the remake, the developers invited almost the entire original cast, including for the Russian localization. Kai Rosenkrantz, the composer of Gothic 1, is again responsible for the soundtrack. Some of the old compositions were reworked, and new melodies were also written. The music organically fits into the local world and works excellently for the atmosphere. The only complaint is that at times it sounds too loud and drowns out the ambient sounds of nature, especially when the hero is in one of the camps. From a technical standpoint, however, Gothic 1 Remake is not so smooth. Unreal Engine 5 is capable of delivering an impressive picture, but even large studios sometimes struggle with its optimization. On a fairly powerful PC with a 5070 Ti, the game runs at 4060 frames on high settings, and switching to the maximum preset leads to a disproportionately severe drop in performance down to 25. In general, the original Gothic was famous not only for its gloomy world but also for its huge number of bugs. The remake in some aspects follows too diligently in the footsteps of its predecessor, so various technical problems will be encountered regularly. Here there is practically everything, from graphical artifacts and strange AI behavior to the disappearance of important characters, which is usually cured by loading a save. Sometimes completely absurd situations arise that border on softlocks, where to progress you have to look for rather sophisticated ways to solve the problem. In a certain sense, Gothic 1 Remake can be called an exemplary remake. It revives an original that is almost unplayable today, adapting it to modern standards, while carefully preserving the ideas and atmosphere of the source. True, sometimes it does this so diligently that along with the harsh and cruel world it also inherits some technical problems, as if offering the player to experience that very spirit of the early 2000s in all its glory. Those who experienced the original in 2001 will surely appreciate the new quests, additional mechanics and modern graphics that retain the spirit of the old Gothic. Newcomers, meanwhile, get an excellent opportunity to get acquainted with one of the progenitors of modern action RPGs, a game that respects the player's intelligence, does not lead them by the hand, and generously rewards curiosity and perseverance. But for those who are used to endless markers, hints, and a guiding thread to the next objective, Gothic 1 Remake is quite capable of causing real pain with its uncompromising adherence to the principles of late 90s/early 2000s game design.